Welcome, everyone. Okay, I want to first off say thank you all for waiting. I know we started a little bit late. We had a little bit of some delays in the background, but I think some of you're going to be okay with that because you were over on Threat Gen. James, I see you. You were definitely over on the Threat Gen side watching that competition. If you were over there, was that not wild? I was rooting for Stacy. If you guys were rooting for Team Stacy, and I'm a little sad that Jerry won. Maybe I have a little bit of disdain because he beat me 2 days ago. I still do not think it was fair that I had the most massive infrastructure and I only had 3 resources. You guys did see that they changed that now everybody has 4 resources. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, go check out threatgen.com, or you can check out my YouTube and see where I competed. It was about an hour some on stream, hour and a half stream with Gerald Ogier over at Simply Cyber. So, hey guys, let's jump into it because I know we started a little late. So I'm not even going to tell you guys and share with you about our upcoming shows. I'm just going to jump right into talking about our guests. But first off, before I do that, please excuse my manners. Welcome, James. Welcome, Jared. If you guys are new here, I'm your host, Jack Scott, and you've come to the right place tonight. Outpost Gray, it is a YouTube channel in collaboration with Grant Thornton Public Sector. And every Thursday, I come live from 3:30 to 4:30 p.m. to provide you information in cybersecurity, technology, and innovation. And I do it with fireside chats, one-on-one interviews like we're going to do today, or panel discussions. And I'm really excited about the guest today because I'll be really honest, I'm going to nerd out a little bit. It's an individual that I have been really excited to have on the show for quite a long time. To be really honest with you, I am really surprised that he's here today because he's an extremely busy person. So I'm going to do a quick intro and then we're going to bring him on the stage. But our guest today is Robert Shea. He is also, you may know him as the host of Fed Heads. He's a national managing principal at Grant Thornton. That's how we have connected. He's been working in the government space for nearly 25 years. He initially started in Congress, then in the White House at OMB, and today we are lucky to have him at Grant Thornton. He is a fellow and former chairman of the National Academy of Public Administration and was appointed to the Commission on Evidence-Based Policymaking. So I'm really excited because there's definitely going to be some interesting conversations. We're going to be talking about the NDAA that's getting drafted for fiscal year 2023. We're going to touch on the OPM breach. We're also going to talk about the most recent OMB memo that just recently came out. So a lot of stuff to cover. And without further ado, let's go ahead and get our guests on the show. Oh my gosh, Robert, welcome.
Welcome. I'm so nervous. You've got all this production capability that's blowing my mind. I'm learning a lot already. It's so good to be with you.
Oh my gosh, I'm so excited about this. I've been waiting for this interview, like I said, for a while. And so I know
you should lower expectations. We should lower expectations, but I'm looking forward to it too. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. And I know that people are going to start trickling in more and more. We have this competition going on right now in the cybersecurity community. It's called Red versus Blue. And we just had a competition end, and a lot of people, we have overlap. So I know James, who's in chat right now, there's a lot of people that are coming over from that. So they're going to be coming in as we're talking. And
I Googled, I almost dropped to move over there, just to be honest.
It might have been more entertaining. But you're in the right spot here. So
okay, great.
Let's kick this off first, sharing a little bit about, I've already shared your very brief bio and your background, but can you share a little bit more about how you even got into the congressional space, doing the work that you're doing that led you into working for Grant Thornton?
Sure. That's, one of my favorite things to talk about, my career. So I came to DC in the 90s, and my first job was with the Committee on Government Reform and Oversight. They've got responsibility for overseeing the operations of the executive branch. It was a great way to get a PhD in government, and I got really hooked on how to improve the management and efficiency of the federal government. It's a target-rich environment, and it's a way to have a real impact on all the American people. After that, I moved to the Senate Government Affairs Committee. It has the same jurisdiction as that committee on the House side. And then the only job I really coveted was working at OMB. OMB's got important management responsibilities overseeing the operations of the executive branch. So I worked in the office of the Deputy Director for Management, had responsibility for the performance management function, but also oversaw the overall president's management agenda. That had a procurement pillar, it had a finance pillar, it had an IT pillar, a personnel pillar, and a performance pillar. So I really did get to see not only the operations of the executive branch, but improving them in each of these realms. And then I've been doing that since I left OMB at Grant Thornton. Grant Thornton, I feel like I get to do the same thing I did in government, but just from the private sector vantage point. So yeah, I hope that helps.
Yeah. No, that's great. It's great context. Can you share a little bit about like OMB's role? Because I have a question that I want to tee up for this, but I think it's important to understand, and it'll even help me a little bit because what I see sometimes is you see these presidential memorandums that come out from the White House that are getting published by OMB. Can you explain what that process looks like and why that happens in that manner?
Yeah, we got 3 hours. Is that right, Jax?
Okay. So, yeah,
The,
let's do
the
a summary.
so there's we could really nerd out on this. So
I
we've got
know.
there's the director of OMB is one of the most important positions in the executive branch, and that person has two deputies, a deputy for budget and a deputy for management. The important thing about how OMB functions is that everything is really tied to the budget. It produces the president's budget request and negotiates with Congress on the enactment of final appropriations for all of the executive branch. The the uh, the management side has a number of statutory offices: the Office of Federal Financial Management, Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs that governs a lot of information policy, Office of Federal Procurement Policy that oversees contracting with the federal government, and the Office of the CIO, created by the eGov Act of 2000, which is celebrating its 20th anniversary.
Yeah.
So all of those, the budget side and the management side, churn out instructions to agencies on how to conduct their regular operations and address emerging management challenges. So, diversity, equity, and inclusion is a major priority for this administration. And you see a lot of executive orders and memos that lay out instructions for how agencies are supposed to help accomplish the enterprise-wide goals of the government in those arenas. Now, how does it work? Once a law imposes a requirement on OMB or an executive order assigns responsibilities to OMB, then OMB will have to craft those instructions in the form of guidance, in the form of memoranda, and those are things that agencies pay real close attention to. They have people whose sole responsibility is to track these responsibilities, these reporting obligations, and the actions that they have to take according to these memos. It's extremely cumbersome. There are some laws that I've been working on that require guidance that have yet to be issued, and people are critical of OMB for taking so long. Sometimes it's really hard to negotiate those kinds of things, getting out of OMB. So, and all of that is all of those documents are accessible on OMB's website. They're quite transparent about putting out those instructions.
Yeah, no, that's a great recap, like over high level overview. So what I want to do now is actually a really great pivot into a topic I want to talk about, kind of pivot around, is talking about the executive order that came out in May of 2021 on improving the nation's cybersecurity. And you were just talking about, the OMB is, in a way, when an order is given from the White House, then they are the actionary element organization. They're the organization that goes out and starts providing the additional guidance to meet the requirements of that executive order, is how I'm kind of understanding you're saying it. So what
That's
we
right.
look at, I'll pull this up really quick. So we have this executive order, and a lot of people have read this executive order because it came right after, colonial pipelines and solar winds. And then this happened. And a lot of it's talking about zero trust. Some of the movements that we're seeing in the federal space is moving into zero trust. And then the most recent OMB memo that came out, which was about software supply chain. And so we see this right here. And then one of the memos, we'll talk about the first memo that just came out. Actually, I'll pause there. For this executive order right here, did you feel like this executive order provided enough time for the organizations to be able to execute? Because a lot of time it was like 120 days to be able to produce what was required within this document. I see this a lot of time in federal documents. They
Yeah.
create these, what I feel like are very arbitrary. Do you feel like it's ever enough time for these organizations to meet these deadlines?
Well, you're making me reflect and feel a little old. Um, it reminds me that on September 12th, 2001, the day after 9/11, I staffed a hearing on critical infrastructure protection for my then boss, Senator Fred Thompson. If
Wow.
you may remember that at that time we were told if you don't move forward with the government's operations, then the terrorists will have won. So we went forward with the hearing. No one was in the audience, obviously, because the buildings weren't open. But I say that really to emphasize that we've been at this a long time.
Mm-hmm.
The government's security posture, particularly its cybersecurity posture, has been a major challenge that's gone unresolved for a very long time. So there's urgency. Every time we try to take action, the intent is to push people very aggressively. And if you don't push them aggressively, then they won't take action. It's also the other side of that coin, and I know I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth, is these are incredibly unreasonable deadlines.
Mm-hmm.
Because the scale of the government's operations are so immense.
Mm-hmm.
And the sensitivity of what it's doing is likewise so intense. That it's very hard to believe that agencies could accomplish these milestones in that short period of time. But it is what it is. What are the consequences if they don't? The tacit thing in OMB guidance is that there'll be a budget impact. OMB is likely to take some action with respect to the budget if agencies don't comply with their requirements. So the answer is yes. The yes or no, they're not reasonable deadlines, but I do get why OMB is taking those actions.
Yeah, and Dave brought up a good Samprini. Hey, good to see you in here. He said, however, nothing makes an agency move like an executive order, and that is absolutely true. I think putting that pressure on there, like you said, is it's a necessity, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And you saw it and we were talking about this before we went live about the OPM breach that happened, and I've been doing more research around it just within college and trying to understand it. And for anybody that's watching this and may not understand or know about the OPM breach, I would first tell you to go research it. But high level, basically, they exposed background information on a significant amount of individuals. But the key here, this was the problem that made this such a big deal, is they knew that they had a vulnerability. It was told to them, but they did not take any actions. And this isn't surprising, Robert. We see this all the time in this space. We know about these vulnerabilities, and then we don't take action. And I think that the OPM brief was kind of an eye-opening moment for the government sector, but you even mentioned it, like we've been fighting this fight for a long time. And so in your professional opinion, what are we doing wrong that these organizations are still not meeting that cybersecurity standard? That just baseline understanding where we had to have an executive order come out in 2021 to tell them you need to have multi-factor authentication on your network. What are we doing wrong as like the cybersecurity professionals?
So at the time of that breach, OPM was responsible for implementing security clearance reform. And there was such a backlog in security clearances that it limited the government's ability to recruit and retain the people it needed to do their jobs. So in some sense, the drive to move faster on security clearances impacted attention that might have been focused elsewhere. We've got to be able to figure out how to walk and chew gum at the same time. But OPM was under such pressure to improve the speed with which it was conducting background investigations that it was lax in its oversight of the operations in other arenas, including contractor performance and the management of these sensitive assets, the most sensitive assets. So I think there's got to be better risk management across the government. OMB in another memorandum has told agencies that they need to inventory the major risks to their operations so that they can put resources behind those that they think are at the most significant or at the biggest risk of impacting their operations. Now, those are excuses. Excuses are like, well, this is a family program. I won't use profanity, Jax, but
like belly buttons. That's what I.
But yeah, belly button. That's right. That's right. Everybody, including the Government Accountability Office, has been saying cybersecurity is the top challenge facing federal agencies since the 90s. So there's though there are a lot of distractions, there's no excuse for leadership not understanding that this is the number one challenge to them accomplishing their mission. It's hard to it's hard to believe, and this this is it's a hard problem to solve, but it's the biggest one, and agencies have been being told that for many years.
Yep. Absolutely. 100%. I think we just need to, I think one of the key things we need to keep doing, which we are, is just continue education. And then putting it in a context that executives and leaders can understand, in a business context of what will the impact be to the critical business function should we not take cybersecurity seriously, and should a breach occur. I think that's one of the key areas, and we are shifting that space. But I personally think that it's going to continue to take these breaches to occur for organizations to start realizing, oh, it might actually happen to me, instead of, oh, it's probably just not going to happen to me, even though we have this vulnerability.
What more do we need?
Yeah. You think they would figure it out by now.
Are we at the point where nobody has a reasonable expectation of privacy or protection of their sensitive data? Yeah. I hope we're not there yet, but I think people need to take some independent steps to protect the data, either their personal data or the data for which they have responsibility, because it's not getting done otherwise.
Yeah. Dave brought up had a good statement here, and I think this is a good pivot into a question that I had for you, actually. And he says, zero trust in software supply chain security is not new, but now it's the hot topic. Yes, it was, especially at RSAC this year. some would consider the executive orders reactionary. And I actually wanted to talk to you about that specifically in the reactionary state. And I have some examples for anybody listening to this, and you may not know this, but some examples of breaches that happened. And then we saw law happen shortly after it would be like the Yahoo breach in 2016. This is where a hacker stole at least 500 million accounts dating back to 2014. Then, right after this breach, we saw a data protection law come out called the Consumer Privacy Protection Act of 2017. And then when this executive order came out, it was shortly after SolarWinds and then Colonial Pipelines. So, of course, the consensus was, oh, yeah, here we go. Federal government is reactionary again. But you have just said it at the beginning of this, and I wrote it down here. It's extremely cumbersome to make these laws. They don't happen overnight. Most of the time, these executive orders, when we see them, they've been in action for years. But I do feel like, Robert, that sometimes when we have a breach, specifically speaking from the cybersecurity law space, when we have a breach, it almost gets these congressional leaders off their tushies in a way to be like, hey, you know that executive order we were working, we probably should get it done now because we just had SolarWinds happen. But what are your thoughts around that? Why do people think we're so reactionary?
Congress and the administration can act with agility in certain situations. You saw it during the pandemic and the economic crisis. More legislation to provide government and state, local governments, health organizations, the resources they need to respond to the pandemic. We got a vaccine for COVID out in record time and distributed it in pretty good form. And I don't know what it is about cybersecurity that makes it so difficult for people to really grasp the vulnerabilities to our economy, to our healthcare, to our environment. I'm just not sure what the missing ingredient is, because again, the overseers have been warning about this for a very long time. One of the things the executive branch has struggled with is what's the right governance structure over cybersecurity in the federal government. This was an issue when we created the Department of Homeland Security, and that has lingered to this day. I will say that the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA, is an enormous contribution to solving this problem. I think we should see them at the center of governance over the executive branch of cybersecurity mature and evolve to be much more effective. I'd like to see them as trusted as the National Security Council, or in how Congress responds to their warnings of these kinds of threats. I tell you, I've been in some classified briefings on cyber breaches that are impacting the government, and they're bone chilling. So, hopefully we can continue the drumbeat and get Congress in a regular process of enacting, assessing, and evolving the federal government's cybersecurity posture.
God, I'm going to go back and quote that. That was a quote right there. That is good. That's what we need. We need you as the poster child to get out there and help with us. Help that happen.
May God help us all. May God help us all.
No, you hit it spot on. And I think there needs to be more flexibility. I actually think you brought this up during our discussion on the Fed heads interview, and my thought around what we need to be doing differently in this space, especially around the laws. And I wrote it down while you were talking, some of my thoughts on this. And I think personal opinion, professional opinion here, I think it's because of the complexity of the threatscape, topped on top of like the emerging technology. So we have emerging technology coming out at such a rapid pace. And then we have the complexity of the threatscape and our adversaries growing and maturing also at a rapid rate. And it's very difficult. And I don't work in congressional law yet, love to one day. But what I foresee is it would be really hard to create a law or an executive order for something that has not happened yet. And I think that may be something that might be hamstringing our federal system, is how do you create a law for something that, for quantum computing, for example, how do you create a law for a technology that hasn't even come to the market yet, or for a threat actor TTP that hasn't breached a network yet, like SolarWinds? That was the first of its kind that we'd ever seen a breach like that occur using that type of technique, and it changed the entire threatscape. What are your thoughts on that? Do you feel like that may be one of the reasons where the law is we're kind of stagnant because our lawmakers don't know what to do?
So this is probably a pretty tacky place to take this discussion, Jax, but the average age of a member of Congress?
Oh, tell, please. I'm
So
guessing older.
yeah, older than even me. So the average age of a member of the House is 58.4 years. In the Senate,
Wow.
it's 64.3.
Wow.
So I think that's a little bit part of the
Yeah.
problem. And there used to be a unit in the Congress, the sole purpose of which was to advise Congress on evolving information technology issues. That has that expired. I don't know why GAO can't perform this role, at least advising on the major issues that are impacting the nation that they need to pay attention to. But that and the leadership, leadership attention in the executive branch. This needs to be on the top of the tongue of every executive who goes to testify before Congress, when they're testifying before their authorizers, when they're making their annual budget requests. These need to be critical there. And CISA has a real important role to play about informing the government, all branches, what the emerging risks and challenges are.
Yeah, that's spot on. I had no idea about the age. That could be, in my opinion, that's a very big factor of it, because if you can't connect and understand where we're going, metaverse, that space alone
Right.
is going to change the laws. Like, there's going to be crimes that are going to be happening in the metaverse that some of the laws that we have in place right now won't be able to touch that space, because they don't cover that world. In a way, it's a different world. It's a different virtual space.
Look, they're still pining for the BlackBerry days. So
The what? The what?
the BlackBerry days.
Oh
They're
gosh.
pining for the BlackBerry days.
Oh
So
man, the BlackBerry days. Oh, he could have been that CEO. Could have. I listened to a podcast. I'm going off on a tangent, but I listened to a podcast on that CEO, and he could have done so successful with BlackBerry, but he refused to go to flat screens that you could do touch on, like the iPhone, and that was the death of BlackBerry. Long
I
story,
had
really short.
coffee. I had coffee with a guy, and I looked over and I'm like, "Is that a BlackBerry?" And he said, "Yeah, I can't give it up." I said, "You've got to be kidding me!" And you're a chief data officer.
Wow.
Anyway, he loves
Oh my
that.
God.
He loves that keyboard. That keyboard's hard to give up.
Man, I remember the Sidekick. Okay,
Yeah.
anyway. All right, we're going to NDAA, one of my other favorite topics to discuss, and I know you're well versed in this, but first, before we dive into the NDAA, I really want to just talk about high level. So for anybody listening, it's the NDAA is the National Defense Authorization Act, and right now they're in the middle of doing the fiscal year 2023 NDAA, and there's a lot of changes just in the last 5 to 6 years that we're starting to see in the NDAA reflected within technology, not just cybersecurity, but electronic warfare capabilities. And you can see things from what type of flowers are going to be planted within the White House lawn to what type of software we're going to use in a satellite. So what I would love for you to do, Robert, is explain to the individuals watching right now, why is the NDAA so important, and how does it affect legislation and where we're going as a federal government?
So that's on our second, third 3-hour show. So the National Defense Authorization Act is what authorizes where the Department of Defense's annual appropriations will go, where its budget will go. It is one of 2 bills that is considered must pass. And it's the only one of those 2 bills that has always been enacted annually. It And because of the scale of what the Department of Defense does, it's often the vehicle on which members of Congress place government-wide management reforms. You'll find some anomalies in there, performance management, in any manner of government-wide requirements are tagged on to the National Defense Authorization Act because it must pass.
Mm-hmm.
Generally, the chairs and ranking members, the members of those defense committees, don't want all this extraneous stuff on there.
Yep.
An exception is in the area of acquisition, since much of what the government acquires is acquired through the Department of Defense. General acquisition reform, you'll find commonly on the National Defense Authorization Act. But information technology reform, cybersecurity issues are also ones that will piggyback on that bill. And then, of course, the Department of Defense oversees so much of the government's critical infrastructure that there's a natural fit in that regard. The Department of Defense also has an important role to play in identifying national security threats, including to our information technology and critical infrastructure. Right now, our fiscal year ends in a little over a week. It was the hope of the authorizers that bill would be considered sometime in October. That may bump, sometime in September. That may bump to September or even beyond the midterm elections.
Wow.
There's always this risk that it doesn't get enacted. Again, it's always been enacted. And hopefully this won't be the year it falls. But I hope that answers your questions about why
Yep.
it's so important in this context.
So, and I'm going to try to structure this in a way. I did not prepare this question, so I'm kind of going off the hip on this. But recently,
Now I'm
within that
terrified.
last
I'm terrified.
I
Now
would
I'm
be
terrified.
terrified too. But in the last couple of weeks, so I have this program called the Cyber Fed News. So every week I provide snippets of what's happening in this federal space, specifically within cybersecurity. Something I've noticed recently while I've been doing these snippets is there's been a lot of agencies that have been coming forward and addressing some of the concerns around the NDAA. And one of them, I pulled up my snippet from like 2 weeks ago, and the bill, they were raising concerns specifically around one section of the NDAA, which was around a provision that was requiring vendors to provide a bill of materials reflecting that their software was free from all known vulnerabilities or defects that could affect the end user. So my question for you, knowing that and seeing that, I started thinking, and this was before the OMB memo had come out for the software vulnerability and supply chain. So I was thinking, well, is this coming out because of the executive order? And then the next thing you know, a week later, the OMB memo came out about software supply chain. So my question is, when we see something like this and we see some of these amendments that are happening within in the NDAA, is it a reflection of what we're seeing from executive orders and the projection of what OMB is going to be producing shortly?
Yeah. Can you restate your question? No, I'm kidding.
Oh my
That
God.
was, I think what I'm hearing you ask is, what comes first, the chicken or the egg?
Yeah,
Right?
yeah. I try to
Is
understand.
is
Yeah.
is executive branch policy driving legislation, or is
Yes.
legislation? And I think it's a little of both.
Okay.
You the executive branch, as hard as it is to get these things through the executive branch, it's easier than enacting a law. If there's a practice in executive branch policy, like an executive order or a memo, that Congress thinks is proving useful, they may enact that into law. OMB doesn't like that because it diminishes its flexibility, but it's hard for it to complain when that's the practice that they put in place. So that's some kind of the kabuki dance that OMB and Congress sometimes engage in. Now, there are plenty of times where Congress is driving the train, and it is responding to the executive branch's lethargy or lack of action in a particular area. Both of them want to get ahead. Congress wants to get credit for taking action in an area where there's a demand. And Congress is also somewhat resistant or annoyed at the executive branch's taking too much authority, exercising too much authority through executive orders and other actions that they think ought to be left to the Congress. It's a complicated soup of factors that contribute to this cycle. But in this case, I think the executive branch is trying to get ahead of things, some of which is already in statute, and Congress's response is to move ahead with legislation that enacts what's been done, but also creates other new requirements.
Wow. Well said. All right. And then I have one more question, and then we're gonna pivot. And this one's about President Biden's announcement on new federal funding, initiating new to support state and local governments as part of an initiative for cybersecurity mandates to help them basically get their cybersecurity posture to a basic level with multi-factor authentication, an incident response plan, and providing like a cybersecurity like executive team. I can't remember the exact team, but basically showing in a way a formalized cybersecurity strategy within these state and local governments organizations. With that being said, he has only allotted, in my opinion, I say only $1 billion with a B dollars to do this. Do you think that is sufficient? Do you think that it's a little bit too little, too late? Should we have had more? This is happening now, but I feel like this type of funding, this type of initiative should have happened sooner, but I guess it's better now than never.
Yeah. I remember the eGov Act of 2002 authorized a fund of $1 billion. And at the time, we just thought that was a crazy amount of money. We're in a different era today where $1 billion, I feel like Austin Powers, $1 billion. So that money would go quickly. But of course, it's not the whole picture. States are getting are receiving money from a variety of sources to fund their information technology needs from the federal government. I'm talking about. So the good news is there's more money than the $1 billion. The bad news is states have probably got to seek that from a variety of funding sources. And so that really unnecessarily complicates things. To have to go to CISA, to have to go to USACA, to have to go to the Department of Commerce, variety of different agencies to cobble together the investment you need to plug some of these holes is mind-numbingly complex. And generally speaking, I think we need to do a better job strengthening the federal government's compact with the states so we don't tie too many requirements to the funding we're providing and trusting them with a few parameters to use those resources wisely. And in the case of cyber, you've got to think that the incentive is to genuinely mature state system operations to a place where they're genuinely protected.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. I'm going to be watching this because it's definitely in my space of where I work, and I want to see how this impacts those state and local governments and or state and local agencies and how that's going to start impacting our just overall federal government. I think we're going to definitely see, I'm going to be paying attention to the NDAA coming out because just in the last 5 to 6 years, we've started to see more politicians get on board and start pushing certain legislation to start protecting protecting their states and protecting their state and local. And that actually, I did not have this question prepared, but I'm going to ask you this because it's
Oh
something
my
that I've
God,
thought
I'm
about.
sweating. I'm
I know,
sweating.
I know.
Yeah.
I got you here in the hot seat. I love it because I'm like, yes,
Before you answer that, something we got to pay attention to. We're about to come out with our annual survey of state CIOs. And I had Graham Finley from Granthorne and Doug Robinson from NASCIO on Fed Heads, which you know well, and they advertise the biggest challenge they have is people. Recruiting and retaining the talent they need to do this work is their biggest challenge. So it seems to me that one of the things the federal government resources could be used to do is to provide those agencies money to help them get those workforces.
Yeah, workforce is the big key. Not only just getting them, but training them. Having a workforce that we can train up and be part of a pipeline would be phenomenal. I know on the federal side, on cybersecurity for the military, our strength going into 2023 is looking pretty grim because it's just on that side, trying to recruit the young workforce, the young soldiers, we're also lacking there. So it's across the board for talent.
Yeah, and I hate to sound ageist. The age of federal employees, that's approaching, the average age of a federal employee is averaging about 50. So I think you have issues there with people's understanding and of this landscape.
Wow. We got to kick some of them out.
Not the 50s that old. I like to defend the 50s people. I think I need to stand up for them. They're not so
got to get them out. Got to get them
That's
educated.
right.
Let us come in. Yeah, that's what'll happen. It'll happen. And I think in all honesty, I think it is going to take time. I think not just education, but it is going to take time for some of those individuals to retire out and for younger blood to start moving in that understands and has lived in the technology space for a while and can understand what those threats look like.
Yeah.
Hopefully not before a big incident occurs. Hopefully that happens before that a big incident occurs to our critical infrastructure, for example.
Right.
Okay, so federal law. I want to just get your personal opinion on this. So
on all federal law?
No, we don't have time for that. But on cybersecurity federal law or lack of it, we have all these siloed laws within America, but we don't have an overarching federal law to protect our states. Can you talk a little bit about why that still is? Why are we still so very siloed? And do you foresee us seeing something of federal law coming out in the near term to start protecting all of the states under one umbrella?
No. I'll fill time to expand on that. The dysfunction in the Congress is a barrier to moving out responsibly in this arena. This is the domain of the oversight committees, and you see them relying on the National Defense Authorization Act to get any sort of government-wide reforms in place. You also, a lot of these laws intersect with the Privacy Act, especially as it relates to governance over information policy. And folks are generally loath to open up that Pandora's box because of so many issues it would touch. There are other priorities. I'm not that this is not a critical priority, but the industry would be advancing reforms that would free up investment in information technology, not necessarily ones that would strengthen existing technology. It would take a concerted communications and lobbying effort to get broader IT reform. The executive branch doesn't help too, because there are so many competing interests for leadership in this space, whether it be DoD, NSC, OMB, DHS. There's always a little bit of jockeying for who
Yeah.
should be the lead that I think gets in our way.
Yeah, it's a very good point. Okay, I like that insight. Very interesting. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Okay, so quick pivot before we do a wrap up. If anybody in here, myself included, is wanting to get involved in Congress or writing policies, what would be a first step for them to be able to start engaging maybe in that space in cybersecurity in any of the areas?
Yeah. I think there are a number of groups that offer opportunities to engage with Congress in this arena. One is the Information Technology Industry Association, ITI. One is the ACT-IAC. That's a great organization that partners with industry, brings industry with agencies together to help drive information policy. So involvement in those kinds of associations are great venues for finding those opportunities. Monitoring what's going on, and reaching out directly to staff on the relevant committees, and by that I mean the Senate Committee on Homeland Security and Government Affairs and the Committee on Oversight and Government Reform. Those are the two committees with broad jurisdiction over information technology and cybersecurity reform. So those are a couple of basic suggestions I would give.
That's perfect. Thank you for that. And you just got a really good compliment. Mark just said, just show you this really quick. He said, "This has been the most amazing and informative session." You're awesome.
Wow.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's a
Thank you,
statement.
Mark.
Thank
That
you,
is.
Mark.
I owe you, Mark.
I love it. Carrie just said, "I like hearing Robert. I'll have to find him if he's on LinkedIn." He is. I'll drop his LinkedIn. Oh my gosh, Dave said, all right, easy, folks.
Dave's jealous.
Dave won't come on the show. I've tried to get him. He always gives me
Really? Because
excuses.
what?
He's
Filling up baby formula bottles.
He is
right now. Yeah.
That's his excuse for a little while, but I'll keep recircling the wagon on him. Robert, this has been amazing. Typically what I do before I send my guests back to the green room is I give you an opportunity to have the stage for, a minute or two to just do final thoughts with the guests. And then we wrap up the show. So I'm going to let you have the stage one last time to just do anything. You could say anything to the guests. Final thoughts.
I'm going to do what I tell my daughters is the most important thing they can do in their career, and that is suck up. So let me just say, congratulations to you on what you're doing. Highlighting these issues, fostering this community is an enormous contribution. We're in a place in our society where community, friendships, bonds are diminishing. So you being the bright light among this group, bringing us together to talk about these important issues, can't be understated, the contribution you're making. So bravo to you.
Well said. Wow. Thank you again. This has been amazing, Robert. This is awesome. I was looking forward to this session. I hope you come back for round 2 because I'm definitely going to be getting some more questions together for you, and hopefully in the next few months. Are you going to Guidehouse by chance? Are you staying at Grant Thornton?
I am going to Guidehouse.
Yes.
I'm going to Guidehouse. I'll be there with you, sister.
I love it. All right. Thank you again. Have a wonderful afternoon, evening.
You too. Take care.
Okay. Bye. Wow, that was amazing. Oh my gosh. Thank you, Lupe. Good to see you in here. Mark, you guys, that was awesome. I can't even tell you, I've been waiting to do that live stream, totally nerd out over here. I actually had some topics that I didn't even get to cover. We were going to kind of get into some presidential memorandums, maybe next stream. But just so you guys know, we have another guest coming on the show next week from Grant Thornton. He is actually right there, Russ Ficken. And we are going to be talking about another favorite topic of mine again. We're going to be talking about the big push on zero trust in enterprise transformation. So we're going to be talking about why is the government moving into this space? Why does it seem like zero trust is so new, but it's really not a new topic? What is zero trust? Can you buy zero trust? What does that look like? Those are all the topics we're going to discuss. You don't want to miss this. Russ has such an amazing viewpoint, and he brings the energy. So it's going to be a live show. And then a friendly reminder for anybody who doesn't know, tomorrow morning, 9 a.m., we drop Cyber Fed News Roundup. And it is all, well, I won't say all, there's a lot of news, but it is the high level news, roughly 6 to 7 stories, 7 minutes or less. And I provide you the high level overview of what's happening in the federal space, specifically for cybersecurity. All right. As always, you guys are the best. You're the reason I'm here. If you like this show, make sure to share it out with others. Carrie, I saw that you liked it already a million times. As always, please like, share, subscribe, do all of the things. And then I'm going to sign out, and I'm going to see you all next Thursday, 3:30 to 4:30 p.m. Thank you all.